Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a cloud solutions architect specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will be another installment in our series where we're looking at ConfigMgr components and things that you would do in ConfigMgr and talk about how you would do similar in Intune, right? Typically for series, I'll have a part 1, 2, 3. I didn't do that in the title here, but this is part of the series. Okay, so in terms of what we're doing here, here's our agenda. We'll talk about kind of the purpose of this discussion here in a minute, and then we'll go into looking at app deployment, ConfigMgr versus Intune. Really not focusing on ConfigMgr here. The focus is really to look at Intune and see how it can do some things that you might be accustomed to doing in Intune. We'll walk through a lot of demos, see how it works, configure, and so on, right? So in this series, the goal, I've meant to do this for a while, right? The goal is to help those that are coming from the ConfigMgr side kind of understand, kind of go through, kind of see how you would do similar things in Intune, right? Intune is not, won't be, never intended to be a replacement for ConfigMgr. There will be things in ConfigMgr that we probably will never see in Intune. That's why co-management is such a really cool thing, right? But there's still a lot of parallels as to what you might need to do in ConfigMgr, in Intune, you do daily in Intune. The first part in this series, again, didn't label it a series, but it is, was talking about groups versus collections. Now we're talking about what we do in Intune for application delivery, really focused on Windows, but Intune is multi-platform, Windows, iOS, Android, Mac OS, whatever, right? Mostly focused today on Windows, since ConfigMgr is a Windows focused platform. And see how we can do some similar things, understand some of the concepts, right? So to jump right in terms of capabilities, I just kind of did a laundry list here. Probably didn't hit every single thing, but I hopefully hit the lion's share. And I'll not belabor the point going through this slide, this table, and the one to follow, but I do want to call out a few things, right? So with any application deployment that you do in ConfigMgr, could be a package, could be an application, right? In Intune, there's really no delineation. There are multiple types of apps that you can deploy, as you'll see. But there's not the package application delineation that you see in ConfigMgr. Each one of those, though, has an ability to surround the app deployment with metadata. That's data that further describes what you are actually deploying, the ability to put a description in, the maybe publish date, or in the case of applications in ConfigMgr and Intune, the ability to have an owner, and so on, right? So that's what I mean. Both of them do have metadata available that you can specify additional detail. Will be different. It's different even in ConfigMgr between packages and applications, right? So you'll see some differences there for sure. Not every field will be in common, but you'll definitely see. In terms of task sequence integration, right? Didn't put these in any particular order as I went through kind of building out the list. Certainly in Configuration Manager, absolutely you can have task sequence integration with your app deployment. You can use a task sequence just to deploy a series of apps, right? And there's other little things around that. So absolutely supported. In Intune by itself, the answer is no, right? Intune has no concept of task sequences. And so, can you achieve running a task sequence on a device managed by Intune, a Windows device? Yeah, absolutely, through co-management. But that's going to be coming from the ConfigMgr side, right? There's no understanding at all, awareness of task sequencing in Intune. Can you use task sequences in something like Autopilot, which is arguably not really app delivery? It kind of can tie in with that. Yes, you can. But again, that's coming from the ConfigMgr side. Uninstall support, right? Customers have wanted that for years, even on the ConfigMgr side, and we really didn't have an option for that, but we did bring it to the table with the application model. In Intune, you have that ability as well. Supersedence, yes, with the application model in ConfigMgr, and also, yes, with Win32 apps in Intune. Can we do a requirements check? Absolutely. With applications in ConfigMgr, we can. In Intune with Win32 apps, we absolutely can do the same, right? What about pre-install detection, right? Do we check first to make sure whether the app is installed already, or do we just go ahead and install it? Well, for the application model in ConfigMgr, yes, you will check. You'll have a pre-install detection that's in there. For Intune, yes, you can as well. For dependencies, absolutely with config. I should have put with applications in ConfigMgr. You can have, well, that's actually not true now that I think about it. You can have dependencies, meaning you need to install another program first. I did call that out at the bottom of the table, with both applications and packages in ConfigMgr. You can do the same in Intune, and I should have put Win32 apps there for dependencies, because that's really where you're going to have that ability, right? Being able to manage return codes. Yes, you can do that in ConfigMgr through the app model. You can also do it in some other ways, not related to the app model too. Can you do it in Intune? Yes, with Win32 apps. Wake on LAN support. That is uniquely a ConfigMgr integration. That's not something you're going to get with Intune. Same thing for maintenance mode. There is no equivalency for maintenance mode in Intune. Now, talking about co-management, right? Could you achieve a scenario where you allowed ConfigMgr to handle doing something like a restart during a maintenance window, and let Intune do some of the deployment of apps that would then only become fully installed and functional and so on? And maybe in some cases, if they required a reboot, after the reboot happens during the maintenance window. Yeah, you could do that. You could figure out something, like that. Run options. So when you have a package or an application in ConfigMgr, you have a drop-down that will basically give you a choice. Run when no user's logged on, run whether or not a user's logged on, run only when no user's logged on. There is no equivalent of that in the app model, in Intune, or any other way for delivery in Intune, right? But you can do that with ConfigMgr. You can get at that maybe in some cases, but it would be a little bit more of a programmatic thing that you would need to do on the Intune side, so not natively built into the console. The option run another program first, right? That is in ConfigMgr. It is in packages. That is a dependency kind of thing. So in the application model for ConfigMgr, the dependency chain is a little bit more, a lot more refined and capable, right? Where you can make sure other programs, not just one, but multiples, are installed first. You could get the multiple thing too within the package model, just a little bit more messy to do that. But yes, right? And so in Intune, you can do that as well for Win32 apps, right? You're getting a sense that Win32 apps kind of stand alone a bit. They do, and I'll explain to you why in just a moment. Okay, now one more table, and then we'll move into the fun stuff. So deploy at a specific time. In ConfigMgr, absolutely yes, you can do that, right? In Intune, generally speaking, no, right? You can, in an app model, in the Win32 app, say that you want to deploy starting at a particular time, right? An available kind of time. But within that, you can't really control when it goes and say only run between this window and so on, right? You can also get at kind of getting to this with a maximum runtime that you can configure on the app model. In Intune, I'll show that to you all in a minute. So user deployment, absolutely for ConfigMgr and Intune. Device deployment, yes, for both. Is being able to configure a required deployment, yes, absolutely for ConfigMgr. And in Intune, yes, but it's called an assigned deployment then, or optional deployment, yes, absolutely. ConfigMgr also yes for Intune. We would then expose it through the company portal so that your user could click on that particular application and be installed, right? And then content location. Where do we store the source files? For ConfigMgr, that's going to be on a ConfigMgr distribution point. In Intune, that's going to be on the Intune content delivery network, right? So Intune does have kind of an equivalent of a distribution point. You don't have any ability to see or manage it. But if you upload source files, that's where it goes, and that's where they're downloaded from to your Intune managed devices. Okay, so distribution prioritization, yeah, you can do that with ConfigMgr. Not really a concept with Intune. Bits integration, absolutely for ConfigMgr and Intune. And then what are the general app types that we can deploy? So I'll give you a little list here for both ConfigMgr and Intune, and you'll see a couple of extras for Intune that don't exist for ConfigMgr, right? So Windows installer, absolutely in common. App package, absolutely in common. Scripts, absolutely. App V is a ConfigMgr thing, not really an Intune thing. Web app, absolutely both, right? Win32 apps, absolutely both. And I should point out here too, as I say Win32 apps, immediately it might make you think of deploying executables, and that's valid, right? That is a Win32 app, but it's not limited to just executables. You can deploy PowerShell scripts through Win32 apps. In some cases, you might need to, right? One example, I'm not going to go into the weeds on this, but one example where you would need to use a Win32 app in Intune versus maybe something more traditional for PowerShell deployment like line of business app would be if you have a command line that is extremely long, that the line of business app just doesn't have enough support for that number of characters for your command line, then Win32 would be a very good option. And there are some scenarios, I'm thinking of one, where you would do that, right? And then uniquely on the Intune side, you see Windows Store. So we formerly did have Windows Store integration on ConfigMgr. The new Windows Store no longer is something we can deploy from in ConfigMgr. You need to have Intune, right? There's a shortcut kind of wizard ability to deploy M365 apps in Intune. You can also have a bit more of an easy experience for deploying Edge. You can do that in ConfigMgr, to be completely fair, but the better way to do it is through Intune, right? So that said, I'm not going to show ConfigMgr because the assumption here is that you understand ConfigMgr, right? But so from here, we're just going to get into looking at some of the differences, right? So one thing that I want to point out, and I'm going to drill into a little bit more as we go along, right? As we start to wrap up the session, I'll spend some time drilling more into this. Whenever we talk about deployments through Intune, you likely will think of Intune as an MDM solution, and it is, right? Just like competitors to Intune are MDM solutions, the Workspace ONE or the Mobile Irons of the world or whatever, they are MDM solutions. MDM is a capability built into the operating system that tools like Intune will be able to leverage to get certain actions done. One of those action types is application delivery. A whole host of things that you can do through MDM. But not every single thing that you might want to do is able to be done directly through MDM, right? The idea of certain configurations, certain app deployments, as you see them on the screen already, are not really a concept in MDM. So we know customers need to do those things. So how do we actually enable you to do some of those things? Well, the answer is that we use, on the Windows side, something called the Intune Management Extension. There's also an equivalent of this on the Mac OS, right? And so with the Intune Management Extension, completely seamless to you, you may not even know it's there, may not have ever seen it, right? If you go into your list of services on a Windows device managed by Intune, you will see something called Microsoft Intune Management Extension. And so with that, we're able to do these 4 types of application deployment that MDM itself does not support. So Win32 apps, a big deal. Being able to deploy PowerShell scripts is meeting the Intune Management Extension, which that goes right along with proactive remediations because that leverages PowerShell. And then line of business apps, that goes through the Intune Management Extension, right? All the others go through MDM. And do you need to know as an admin not for actually setting these things up. For troubleshooting, maybe, right? We'll touch on this a little bit more as we get further, in the session. But everything else goes through traditional MDM. I'll also point out that you'll see some capabilities in Win32 apps, for example, that you don't see any equivalent for on MDM, right? And that's because it's a different way of getting things done. Certain options are available whenever you're going through Intune management extension that you don't see available whenever you're going through an MDM type equivalent to get that done, right? So just to explain why it might look a little bit different. Okay, so that said, let's get into the fun stuff and actually start to see how this works. So what I'm going to do here is take you into the Intune portal. I'm going to do a couple of sample configurations for deployment, specifically one for MSI, one for Win32 apps. I'll show you the other options. You'll see them on the screen, but I'm not going to go through each one. In fact, these deployments that I'm going to configure, these apps that I'm going to configure, I'm not going to deploy them, right? Because one of them I know would fail because it's kind of cobbled together just to do the example. But we'll talk through it. You'll see the examples, right? So if I come to here and I go down to apps, now one of the things that I like a lot on the Intune portal, you may not want, as I mentioned, Intune is a platform that will support managing Windows and iOS and macOS and Android, right? You may not care about those devices. You may not even have permission to see them, so that's one thing. But if you do, and all you care about is focusing on a given platform, then you can select that platform, right? If I look at all apps in this context, I'm going to see every single app for every single platform and all of the options available. Let me show you the difference, right? So if I click on all apps and I click add, then I'm going to see in the drop down an option of the options available for every single type of platform that I have, right? So here, store apps, you'll see Android, iOS, Microsoft, managed Google Play, blah, blah, blah. M365 is supported Windows 10, Mac OS, and this is fine. Looking at it at this level is completely fine. But if you want to be a bit more refined, if you're a Windows administrator and you want to just focus on those things that you care about, then we can go down here and click the specific platform. And now Windows apps is the only option, and this is all I will see, right? And whenever I click add, the only options I will have are those app types that are deployable to Windows. So if you remember back what we just looked at, M365, I had Windows 10 and Mac. Edge, Windows 10 and Mac. Mac is filtered out here because I said I care only about Windows, right? So that's what I'm going to get in this view. Now, what I want to show you is adding the app here, but I want to show it, specifically adding it an MSI, which will be a line of business app, and also a Win32 app. All right, so let me go choose, first of all, line of business, right? So this is Windows, and so you'll see for Windows, it's MSI, AppX, AppX Bundle, MSIX, MSIX Bundle, right? So if you're deploying an MSI in a traditional way, then you would use line of business. So again, as I kind of referenced in the precursor to this demo, is line of business the only way to deploy an MSI? No, not at all. It depends on your needs. And I referenced a scenario where the command line just was not, didn't support enough characters for deploying a given MSI, right? I'll give you the details of that scenario. I'm not going to dig into it, but just so you understand, right? One of the common things in a co-management world specifically, autopilot, whatever, that you will do on the Intune side is deploy the ConfigMgr client, right? And usually with the command line options that people will choose, that command line will fit nicely within the allotted characters for line of business app, as you'll see in just a minute, right? And I'm not doing the ConfigMgr client right here, so don't think that I am, but you'll see the option for putting in your command line options. For certain scenarios, when deploying the ConfigMgr client, there are way too many characters on the command line to be supported by the line of business app capability in Intune. So what do? If you need to deploy that MSI in Intune for Config Manager Client, what do? You need to have all of those different command line options. Well, you can use Win32 app, right? Now, you're not going to use Win32 app to deploy an MSI directly. But what you can do is use the Win32 app to deploy a PowerShell script, and that PowerShell script can then reference the MSI and put in whatever command line options you want, and it works very, very, very well, right? So again, just to give you a scenario where that would be applicable. All right, so now I'm going to go forward, and I'm going to choose that I want to go and deploy an MSI. So this MSI that I'm going to choose is not really one, again, I'm going to deploy. It's one that I kind of cobbled together really for this demo, but you'll still see the options and such that are available to me whenever I'm configuring this. So the first thing, I'm going to select my application package, and I'm going to browse to it, right? Here, I'm just going to go to my desktop and search for my MSI, right? Now, it could be any of these kinds right here, but since it's MSI, that's the one I'm going to open. Tell me what it is. I'm going to hit OK. Here's the default execution, right? It tells me whether it's a MAM-enabled app or not, and so on, right? Now, I get all of these options. I can put in, this is my metadata, right? I can put in any kind of description I want. I can enter, in fact, I have to enter a publisher name. Whether or not the app install context is a certain way, you may or may not have a choice of this depending on the MSI type, right? The versioning, if you want to ignore that or not, right? So that we actually respect the version. Here's your command line arguments. Now, I mentioned with the Config Manager client, in most scenarios, you have more than enough space to accommodate your command line arguments if you were deploying the Config Manager client. In some cases, you don't. Right now, unless things have changed, here, let me just be silly. I'm just going to put in a whole bunch of characters while I'm talking. Unless things have changed, we don't really tell you that there's a character limit that's been exceeded on the command line argument. We just give you an error whenever you try to go forward, as I recall. I'll see here in a minute, right? And the error is a bit cryptic. It doesn't lead you back to, hey, I have too many characters in the command line arguments. So I spent a decent amount of time trying to figure that out back in the day, right? And that's really the only case I've ever run into it is with the Config Manager client. So that's why I share it, right? And so that was the workaround for that scenario, is to deploy the Config Manager client via a PowerShell script where I could then use as many command line arguments as I wanted to. All right, so I'm almost done here, and then I'm going to be extra silly. Let me do this. I'm going to go up and copy all this and then paste it down just so I know without a doubt. Okay, so they did do this. This was not there previously, so this is awesome to see, right? I had not tested this since way back in the day. So they do tell you now the maximum length of the command line has to be 1024 characters. So in the one scenario that I was working with the Config Manager client, it definitely wasn't. But we do tell you that now. That's awesome. Okay, then you see other things, different categories that we can select, whether we want to show this as a featured app in the company portal, maybe, maybe not, right? Just different detail, owner, logos, whatever, right? Then I can click next. And really, that's all I need, because Intune was able to grab additional detail from the MSI to populate certain things, right? Kind of like Config Manager does as well. One thing I will tell you, though, is when you deploy MSIs, you will have maybe a habit of using certain command line switches, and that's fine, right? But make sure that the command line switches that you're using are not already set by Intune, meaning that there are some, I think there's a couple, I can't remember the ones exactly right now, there are a couple that are default set by Intune. So if you add them in addition to what Intune has done, that's going to cause an error. And we document what those are. So just take a look at our documentation for the details. But just be aware that some of those are already documented. So from here, it's just a matter of setting scope tags, assigning this to groups if you want this to be a required assignment, fine. If you want it to be available, you do it here, right? And if you want to do an uninstall, that's where we support it here. In my case, I'm not going to assign anything. I can click next, and then I can review and create it. I'm not going to really create it because I don't care to keep this. I'm not going to deploy it, right? So I will just go ahead and exit out here. But this gives you a sense anyway of using Intune to create a line of business app. Now also, what I want to show you is if I'm going to create a Win32 app, right? So Win32 is, again, not just executables, absolutely executables, but you could also use it for PowerShell scripts. You could use it for batch files, as I recall. Haven't done that in a while, right? But I think that's the case, and so on, right? So you could use it in some other scenarios. If you wanted to call cmd.exe, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, and do something from the command line that way, you could probably get that done, right? There are different ways to do something. So I'm just going to select my Win32 app, and then it's going to ask me what file, what app package file. So I'm going to go locate this, and notice it's looking for Intune Win. Right? What does that mean? That means that in order to deploy a Win32 app, right, executable, PowerShell script, whatever it is, batch file, whatever, you need to be able to, you need to wrap it effectively in this thing called an Intune Win file. Now, the process of doing that, I'm not going to go through in this video. It's not hard, right? It's basically running a command line against the source files, and then we can create this Intune Win. And so here's one that I did in an Intune Win file. And so I will say that in some testing scenarios, it can be a little bit frustrating to have to redo the Intune Win and re-upload it every time. I'm thinking of a scenario where an individual was using a PowerShell script, and they had not put all of the logic that should be maybe in the PowerShell script to make it easier in there. And every time they maybe wanted to make a change, they had to tweak it, right? Ultimately, the way that we made that easier is we would have the PowerShell script start and read parameters out of a text file that we included, maybe somewhere that was easily updatable, storage in Azure or someplace, right? And we would call that by the PowerShell script, and that way, every time we tweaked a parameter, we didn't have to recreate the Intune Win. We would just update that particular external file, and that would work. And you could have derivatives thereof that would make the process easier, right? Completely up to you. But I just share that bit of detail. So I'm going to open the Intune Win here and hit OK, right? And so we'll read the Intune Win. We see from the detail what it is. Again, publisher name, app version, if I want to put that in, categories, show it as a featured app, blah, blah, blah. It looks very similar to the line of business app. And then we have, sorry, I do need to put this in. Even though Microsoft is not the developer, it is what I will put in here. There we go. Click next, and then now we have program detail that we need to put in. So I will just put in, I don't even know what the command line is, but I'll just put in notepad.exe. Fine. Uninstall command. I do need to specify this. Notepad, I'll just use the same name. I'm not putting this in here to be real. I'm putting it in here to satisfy the requirements of the wizard, right? Installation time. You need to specify this, and you need, just like in ConfigMgr, you need for this to be a realistic value. How long, at the longest, would you expect this install to take, right? And that way, this also can have implications as to when you want the app to start after a certain time frame, and then when you want it to be done by a certain time frame, right? There's ways to kind of use this number to get at some of those kind of things, even though we don't have the direct equivalent of a maintenance window and some different things like that. You can kind of use some of these options to cobble that experience together. It's not perfect at all, right? ConfigMgr is the better way to do maintenance windows for sure, but I'm just trying to explain how it works, right? How you want this to work. If you want the install per user device restart options, right? So you can do that, right? Here's where you manage your return codes. And we give you all of these. You can add more if you want to, if you have an app that has a unique set of return codes, whatever, right? Here's our requirements. So what operating system does it matter? 32-bit, 64-bit, whatever. What is your minimum operating system that you want to install this on? Any disk space requirements, right? So you can absolutely do that. Physical memory requirements. We're setting up our requirements. Notice these are required. These are not, right? So I'm not going to put anything in these fields and so on, right? And if I don't satisfy the needs for detecting requirements here, I can go add additional requirements to these, right? So it gives you the ultimate flexibility. And so, again, when the Win32 app deployment is very much akin to the application model in ConfigMgr. And so you'll see most of, not all, but most of the same kind of options from ConfigMgr's app deployment in Intune for Win32 apps, right? So here, if we're going to set up a specific requirement, we can use a script, use the registry, use the file system. So really, with the script option being here, you can do anything you want, right? Complete and total flexibility. All right, so next, then I'm going to do my detection rules. So I can do a custom detection rule or manually configured, right? So I can go add my detection rule. I'll show you both. And same kind of thing, MSI file registry, right? So no script, so MSI instead of script, and then file or registry. So very much the same as the app model in ConfigMgr, or I can use a custom detection script. So I want to use a script, and there's things that I care to look for besides MSI file and registry. This is how I would go do that, right? Okay, and then how I want to do it. All right. So let me go back and say manual, and I have to put this in. I don't have a choice not to. So I'm just going to use something to satisfy the wizard. I don't care, right? C:\\, I have a funky keyboard here. There, blah. And then detection method, file or folder exists. And I'm good here, right? So that's going to satisfy. I can move forward. And then finally, my dependencies. I do not have to put anything here. But if I want to, the dependency check here would be just like it is in ConfigMgr. I can install another app before this one if I want to. Select what apps need to be installed, etc. Right? That's what that does. So again, very much similar to ConfigMgr. With that done, I specify supersedence. Again, not required. If this version of the app supersedes an existing version of the app that's been deployed, then this is where I can make that happen. Again, very similar, same as the ConfigMgr option. And from there, I've completed all of the app deployment options, and I can go and actually assign scope tags, do my deployments, and so on. Now, here's what I want to show you that's unique for doing your assignments here, right? Notice all of these. Now, we're not going to here talk about filters. That's something I'm going to talk about in one of my group sessions. At the time of this recording, the group session that I'll present will be coming up in a couple of weeks, but I'll have it recorded. But notice this. I'm going to add a group. Oh, for ease of use, I'm just going to say all devices, right? Because I'm not going to save it. And notice, here is where I will show some of my other options, like do I want to show all of my toast notifications to the user, right? Here's where I would go configure this, and then the delivery optimization options and so forth, right? That's on the assignment. So availability as soon as possible, and or not, right? Here, device time zone as soon as possible, deadline, a specific date and time for a deadline. That's what here's another one of those things for Win32 apps. This is not here. This is not these are not options for anything besides Win32 apps, right? I'm questioning right now a line of business, but Even there, it's not. I'm going to go back and triple check just to make sure here in a minute, and I'll pause the recording check and let you know. But it's not. It's not an option. But here's where you set it, right? This should be very familiar from a config manager world. And so being able to set a specific date and time and combining that with your maximum allowed runtime, that's where you can get at, it's not great, but it helps. You can get at a maintenance window in Intune when you're using Win32 apps, right? Again, not telling you it's great, but it's a way to kind of get at that kind of thing. Okay. Then also, what do we have? We have restart grace period. Do we want to allow for that? What does that mean in terms of these kind of options, right? Same kind of thing. All right. And then delivery optimization. Let's see, delivery optimization. Yeah. So as you're noticing, this clicking options here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? There's 5 options that I can click here. Each one brings up the same exact window. So assignment settings included, app settings and user notifications, whether it's Toast, here's your delivery optimization stuff for content download. Here's your installation deadline, grace period. All of that is all in the same window, right? Anyway. But knowing where those options are, really important, because those are things that you might care about as an admin, that you're kind of wondering, can you do these kind of things in CM, or in Intune? The answer is absolutely yes. And while I'm thinking about it, I was going to pause the recording, but hey, why not? Let's just go look at our MSI. Here's my config manager client, one of them that I had configured. And so let's just go look at the properties of this, because I'm almost certain, unless they change something and I'm not aware of it, that there is no ability to do any of that in the assignment for, none of that, right? So you can't do any of those additional specific start times and blah, 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 Toast notifications, whatever, with direct line of business, but you can with Win32 apps. And so that's an influence to possibly your decision. If you need to deploy something and you need those options, then even though it may be something you could deploy like an MSI with a line of business, maybe you're going to choose to do it through the Win32 app experience, because you do have some of these options, right? I'll jump ahead a little bit and say that maybe you choose the Win32 as well, because maybe it's a little bit more familiar, at least to start with, right? We'll get into this in just a minute. But logging, right? In Config Manager, any IT person that uses Config Manager is aware of the extensive logging available in Config Manager. Coming to Intune and looking at how we will do some things, it's not that the logging isn't there, it's different, right? We have a lot of information that you'll see in a minute that can be useful to you to help troubleshoot and understand how things work. But in the Win32 app, because it runs through the Intune management extension, we do have logs there, not like Config Manager, but very similar to what you would experience in Config Manager. A Config Manager admin would be very comfortable in that environment. And I'll show all that to you here in just a minute. All right, so those are the 2 demos I wanted to show you. So let's go away from Intune for now. I'm going to just go ahead and minimize, and we'll be back to our and go back from there. Sorry, I'm trying to find the cursor because I need to clear my throat. Okay, much better. And by the way, whenever I paused to clear my throat, I did go validate, because I was questioning in my mind about using Win32 and Intune Win wrapping process to deploy batch files. And absolutely, yeah, that's what I knew it was. But for some reason, I just wanted to go back and validate. All right, so that is how we go about configuring, also kind of showing you in action, kind of the same thing. And so as we're starting to wrap up, there are some more things that I want to show you or talk about, right? First is the idea of optional versus required. Both of them are assignments, so I should have used required instead of assigned. but optional versus required deployments, right? So in ConfigMgr, if you do an optional deployment, then that's going to show up in, well, by default, typically in Software Center, right? You can configure ConfigMgr to use the company portal instead of Software Center, right? And that helps, especially as you're starting to do some things with Intune and some things with ConfigMgr in a co-managed scenario. We can have that unique one portal, right? But in Intune, if you have an optional assignment, it's going to only show up in the company portal, right? A required one is just going to go and install on the device, no issue at all. It's just going to happen, right? Another concept to understand that's not exactly just related to app deployment, but it is absolutely something to understand about app deployment, is how policy works, how Intune goes and retrieves policy. So in ConfigMgr, we are accustomed to the managed client going out and checking ConfigMgr for policy by default once an hour, right? And that's fine. You can go ahead and accelerate that process, go to the device, cause it to check in now. You can use the high-speed notification channel to tell the device to check in now for policy and get that to happen quicker. But by default, and in most cases, once an hour, right? That's not the case in Intune. In fact, Intune complicates it a little bit more because we do have the MDM option, and where most things run through MDM. And then we have the Intune management extension, right? So let's talk about this. When you have a managed device, let's talk about MDM first. There are really three ways that that device is going to get. Oh, I should also say before I do this, we are working to make this an experience that it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about MDM or Intune management extension, that it's true that both kind of work the same way. But right now, as I do this recording, that's not the case, and I don't have any dates when that will happen, but I do know that's something that we're trying to clean up, right? Anyway, all right, so when we're talking about MDM, which again, that's what MDM is, how the vast majority of things in Intune work. Three different scenarios for policy, acquiring new configurations that need to be implemented, whatever. The first one is immediately post-enrollment, right? And I'm not going to go into the details. There's an article that talks about this, but we know, for example, in an autopilot scenario, or if you just recently deployed any platform, iOS, Android, macOS, whatever, we know that there's very likely configurations that are out there waiting for that device, and we need to get those configurations down as quickly as possible, right? And so one way that we work to accomplish that, I'll mention another one in just a minute that has nothing to do with policy, but one way that we accomplish that is immediately after enrollment, that device is going to check in with the MDM service much more frequently. Within the first, each device is slightly different, but just suffice to say, within the first couple of hours, we have a cadence that starts off really, really quickly, checking in, within minutes, right? Multiple times within minutes, and then, more slowly as we go on for the first couple of hours, and then finally, after the first couple of hours, we settle into a routine check-in cadence, which is going to be roughly every 6 to 8 hours per device, right? So there is that scheduled check-in, roughly 6 to 8 hours per device. Whenever folks look at that from a ConfigMgr side, when I looked at it from a ConfigMgr side, we think, wow, that's way too long. We can't wait that long. And is there any way to customize this? And the answer is, there's no way to customize this. It is every 6 to 8 hours. But that's not where the story stops, right? I've come to view this kind of policy check-in and sorry, what I just did, if you didn't notice, I went from the post-enrollment, which is going to happen very quickly for a period of time, up to a couple of hours, then we'll settle into our scheduled policy check-in, which is going to be that every 6 to 8 hours, right? So I moved to the scheduled check-in. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, that's challenging. What I've started to view the scheduled check-in as is a fail-safe check-in, because for most things, many things that you will want to deploy immediately in Intune, we don't wait for the scheduled check-in, we do it right away, right? So that's why if you're working in your lab and you go do a required deployment or whatever, and then you walk away and come back just even a few minutes later, it's probably already in the process of going into action on your device, right? Because we're not waiting in all cases for that 6 to 8 hour check-in. Sometimes we do, right? There is a scale situation here where we can't do what I'm going to describe on every single number of your devices in a massively large environment. I'm thinking of customers now that are in the millions of devices, probably, that are managed by Intune, and those kind of environments. Scale means that we can't do completely for all of your devices what I'm going to describe, but for a huge number of devices, yes, we can. And would you even notice the scale limit? Probably not, unless you're just deploying something to every single device you have. Anyway, that's beyond the scope of this, right? Not going to go into that anymore, but I do want to call that out. But the mechanism I'm talking about how we get that done, is this process called WNS, Windows Notification Service. This is not just a Windows thing. This exists for iOS, for Mac, for Android. In the case of iOS and Mac, Apple has their service. In the case of Android, Google has their service. Windows, we have ours for Windows devices. And so every Windows device on the planet maintains a connection to Microsoft through our Windows notification service, so that we have the ability to tap it on the shoulder and cause certain actions to take place. So this is definitely not just an Intune thing, but Intune is able to leverage it, right? Intune is one of the services that can leverage Windows notification service. So the process flow generally is like this. If you are an admin and you go configure a thing to be required, could be an app, could be a configuration policy, could be whatever, right? And you deploy it to a group, say it's required, go, right? And that group contains 10,000 Windows devices. Then Intune is going to look at that and say, oh, wait a minute, there's 10,000 Windows devices now that I own and manage, and we need to get something to happen on them right away. So Windows notification service here. Here's the list of these 10,000 Windows devices that you know. Go tell them all to check in now, right? And so Intune shuttles the request to Windows notification. Windows notification shuttles it down to the device. That action is very much the same as if the user on the device were to initiate a manual sync. That device comes in, checks in with Intune, realizes, oh, wait, there's stuff I need to do. Let's go do that, and starts to do it. And that's why it happens within minutes. Now, there are things that could get in the way. If you have firewall rules or different things that prevent us from establishing the Windows notification channel, then yeah, that's not going to happen that way. It doesn't mean that you're not going to sync. It means that you are going to have to wait on that scheduled sync in order to get that done, right? Unless you have the users manually check in, they go click the sync button locally on the device, then it would work, right? But if you're waiting, if you're trying to do that anywhere other than on the device directly, then you're going to have to wait for that scheduled sync if the WNS connection is not working. The good news is it probably is working just fine. You probably don't even know where it is. And again, this is not kind of beyond the scope of what we want to do in this session to talk about it, but it is out there, right? The other thing that is an option, as we talked about on Windows devices and Mac, but we're talking about, we'll mainly stay on Windows here, is the Intune management extension. So I mentioned that, and I mentioned you can see it in services. So this is my managed device, and you can see the Microsoft Intune management extension right here. It is running, right? So all of that I just described with how you get policy checked with device managed by Intune through MDM, all of that goes out the window, at least for now, as of this recording, for Intune management extension. You can go onto the device and click sync 100 times, and you will never get the Intune management extension, again, as of this recording, to synchronize with Intune. The only way to get the Intune management extension to synchronize with Intune out of schedule is to restart it, right? Just restart the service and it'll go out and sync. Other than that, we're waiting on the scheduled sync, which I believe is every 2 hours. You'll see in a minute the registry key where that is defined. the temptation might be in that registry key to change that, and I would strongly urge you, do not change that, right? But Intune Management Extension is its own entity, works on its own sync schedule, and so forth. So that's what I want to show you. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper, right? Let me pull in a VM to dig a little bit deeper. And what I'm going to show you, when I say I want to dig a little bit deeper, this is just maybe to help you understand. In no way am I digging all the way in so that you see every single thing. This is a subject unto itself, right? We could spend a lot of time here. And maybe at some point we will. Other sessions I've done some similar things. But this is in the spirit of trying to help you understand how to troubleshoot and where you can go to troubleshoot, right? So still, let's go back to the MDM versus Intune management extension. Oh, what happened? Where did my device go? Did it disconnect? Let me go find it. It might have. There. Come on, device. Okay, there it is, right? So understand how you would go about troubleshooting some things if you are purely in the MDM world where you're doing some things, and then how you would contrast that in the world where you're using the Intune management extension. Right, so the first place we'll stop, and there's a couple of places, under local machine software Microsoft, we're going to go down to enterprise desktop management. We're in the context of apps, so that's where I'm going to focus this discussion, right? There's another I'll show you the registry key where it is here in just a second. I'm not going to go into it, right? But there are a couple of registry keys that are of interest here. Here's Enterprise Desktop App Management, right? And so here I see a SID. I can look at it. Here's my list of MSIs. These are all the GUIDs associated with the MSIs that I've deployed. Let me find the one I'm looking for. Here we go, right? So as you look through here, you're going to see all of the details about it, the status codes, basically the product code, any kind of enforcement schedules, blah, blah, blah. A couple of things that are useful is here's content download URL. Here's where actually, let me go, this is what I'm looking for. Let me find this. The download location. We go, there we go. There's one, right? We'll delete these from time to time. Here's where the content is downloaded on the Windows device. So if you, again, comparing between ConfigMgr and Intune, in ConfigMgr, we have the CCM cache folder. And that's where all of our content's downloaded. It's executed from there. In the Intune world, we do have that concept of CCM cache. It's not exactly like CCM cache at all, but it is a folder where we will download our content and we'll be able to execute it from there, right? Knowing this would be very beneficial in the case of troubleshooting certain scenarios. There was one scenario, one of many, but one scenario I was trying to help a customer troubleshoot that wasn't even using Intune. They were using a third party, and they were finding an app that they would deploy version X, and then they would come along and deploy version Y, and version Y was just not getting implemented at all, and they were wondering why and thinking that MDM was having problems, whatever. Well, come to find out by kind of digging into this and finding out where the content was getting downloaded, it wasn't anything wrong with MDM. It was the fact that the content download was so incredibly slow that it wasn't that version Y was not getting implemented. It's that version Y was taking so long to download that it seemed like it wasn't happening, right? But we were able to get into that here and kind of figure out some different reasons why that was happening and resolve the issue. And so knowing where this all is a very good thing to be able to see, right? So that's one location. That's the main location that I want to show you for this. I referenced another location, and I will just mention this to you, but I'm not going to go greatly at all into it. In fact, where'd I go? Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong key. That's what I'm doing. I think Microsoft, hang on, where is it? There it is. Sorry, right in front of me. Policy Manager. This is also used by Intune to store the different configurations that have been brought down. And so here are all of my device configurations. Here's all of my user-focused configurations based on the user SID. This is the way, if you're looking at the current registry key, how you can see different configurations that are in place on the device. That's all I'm going to say right now, right? This is not app specific. That's all I'm going to say about it, but in the spirit of showing you other places that might be of interest, right? Another location that would be, here, let me find it. Another location that would be interesting for app deployment specifically would be looking at the Intune management extension. My VM went away again. Probably I was looking at my notes. The Intune management extension. So if we go up to eyes, here it is, Intune management extension. So if you have apps that are getting deployed through the Intune management extension, then you might want to look at certain things here, right? Maybe there's some different settings here that have been deployed and policies and blah, 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 right? There's a lot of good stuff under here. I'm not going to really dig into this. Here's some different apps that might be targeted out there, right? Detail you can learn, different things, right? So a lot of good stuff in here. You would find under Intune Management Extension some of the default settings that are out there, right? And other things. So I'm not going to go into that in any more detail, but this is registry is a very useful location to be able to go figure out some of the things that might be interesting, right? Now, another place that is really helpful is our event viewer, right? So, not everything, but a tremendous number of things that we do with Intune, all the MDM stuff, is going to be visible in the event viewer. Right, so if I go to Microsoft, and the first place I'm going to stop, let me expand this, is going to be under device management. Go down to device management. Here, where's device management? Go up. There we go, device management. And I'll look at my admin logs. There's operational logs too, right? Operational logs too, but admin. And so we can look at different things that might be of interest, right? For app deployment, you'll see everything. You'll see synchronizations for policies. You'll see lots of stuff here. But for the application deployment stuff, we're looking for events that start with 1900. Like here's one, alert failed to be sent. Here's one for processes terminating, the installer processes terminating, other things that's already running, different useful things for sure for detecting apps. So for example, just to run them off, I don't have all these probably easily discoverable in here, but a lot of them. Event 1901 is that a node was created successfully. 1904, the MDM app installer task started. 1905, application content download started. 1906, application content download finished. 1920, 1940, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but a bunch of them that will show you what's going on. Well, so again, you might want to troubleshoot at different places, but one of the places might be content download. Well, the content download in Intune happens via bits. You'll see whether the content download started or not in this event log. If it did start, then bits is going to be involved in the process. So you can go to the bits log, bits client log, and see that here, right? So operational, you can see like 3, oops, sorry, my bad. I did that wrong. Operational, you can see event log, event item 3 created a new job. Event item 4 is complete, yada, 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 right? And then if you have delivery optimization in the mix, which hopefully you do with Intune, then we'll have that factored in as well. So anyway, lots of information here that you can use for troubleshooting. Very useful. It's not in log form for MDM, but it is out there. But I mentioned that Intune Management Extension is similar to ConfigMgr in that it does have logs, right? It's a comfortable place for ConfigMgr admin. So if we go to Program Data, look under Microsoft, and then look under Intune Management Extension, where is it? There we go, right? We have logs. I'm not going to go through them. Here they are. You can take a look. If you're doing a Win32 app install, you'll definitely see it in these logs. So that's where knowing the difference between MDM and Internet Intune Management Extension and where things get deployed, really, really, really important. And that's as far as I'm going to go. Again, I'm just scratching the surface, but I wanted to give you that in the sense of trying to help you get a better understanding of where to look at things. And with that, we are going to wrap up the session here, and we'll continue this. I don't know the next topic yet as of this moment, but we'll continue this series soon, and we will see you next time.